Good afternoon. Welcome to Itasca Waters' Practical Water Wisdom series, during which we focus on issues related to water and ways to resolve those issues. I'm your host, Brian Whittemore. Today's episode is called Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker. 'Tis the season, right? Well, almost. Anyway, Itasca Waters is a nonprofit volunteer organization headquartered in the Itasca Headwaters region of Minnesota for the purpose of educating folks about the value of clean water for the environment and for the economy. Itasca Waters has provided 15 years of protecting and promoting clean water in the region. We've brought in $3 million in grants and contributions, all of which went for water science and education, educated thousands of students and community members, strengthened local conservation capacity, and has been recognized as a key nonprofit for lake and watershed stewardship. We're located in the headwaters of the Mississippi River, the Great Lakes, and Hudson Bay, but you don't need to live near us to join us. Please consider becoming a member of Itasca Waters by using the QR code on your screen or going to our website, itascawaters.org/donate, and using the guest login. Membership is quick, secure, deductible, and only $35. We thank these partners for helping Itasca Waters offer our Water Wisdom series. Dr. John Downing will speak to us for about a half hour and then take your questions. To submit a brief question, just click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and type it in. You can do that at any time during today's program, and we will read the questions on your behalf. Today's program is being recorded and will soon be available on our website, itascawaters.org. As we mentioned, the subject for today is Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker, and our expert presenter is Dr. John Downing. John is the director of the Minnesota Sea Grant Program, a research scientist at the Large Lakes Observatory on Lake Superior, and a professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. So, John, put down your snow shovel and take it away.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. You can see I have my snow shoveling gear on, my official Sea Grant snow shovel stuff. Yeah, so, today we're going to talk about the Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker, and it's something that I really like to do. It's formerly called the Minnesota Ice Out Walk, and we are, and so we have improved it and made it work better. But I just thought you might want to look at what the snows look like over the last 24 hours, and that this is really relevant to ice out, because many of you who've lived on Lake Snow, that snow cover does have some impact on ice. You can see that all the way up in Grand Marais area, there are some snow depths of snow falls of over 3 feet, which is an amazing overnight snowfall. So I hope that you are all safe and that you are warm and that your arms are not worn out from lifting heavy snow. So before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge some of my colleagues and some of my friends from Itasca Waters. Jan Sandberg will be doing the Q&A today, and Brian, who you just heard from, and Carrie Bates and Rose Lawler are in the background handling the Q&A, and thank you so very much for doing that. Some more acknowledgments are to Jane Reed, who did most of the programming. So if you Google something like Minnesota Lake Thaw something or other, you'll find her work where you can look up any lake and its forecast date of thaw. Also, John Emmer, who's now somewhere in Nevada, I think, dug out all the data, and Marie Toms is the Director of Communications and Associate Director of Minnesota Sea Grant, who made a lot of this happen. Thank you to you three, too. So here's our problem. The problem is, I know when I was a kid, it seemed like ice out was pretty much plus or minus 5 days, sort of May 1st and one of the northern lakes, plus or minus 5 days, maybe a week. But now you can see how variable those ice out dates have been. And this graph over here shows the distribution of several thousand observations of ice out, and these are in weeks early and or weeks late. And so now you can see that ice out or the disappearance of ice or the thawing of our lakes can vary by something like 9 weeks. Now, 9 weeks, to give you some perspective, is just about 2/3 of a 3-month vacation season. So it has a real big effect on how much time we actually can use those lakes for water-based recreation. It's gotten a lot more variable, and the start of the open water season varies substantially. The forecasts really matter to people. This is a nice AI generated image of someone slalom skiing around blocks of ice, which we know doesn't really happen. I hope it doesn't. But seasonal uncertainty is one of tourism's greatest challenges. It disrupts the industry and it drives something like 5% of Minnesota's GDP. And we're a little lower than the global average, which is about 10% of the gross domestic product on the planet. And this all depends, the value depends on predictable timing. It causes huge losses in lodging, in food services, in transportation, travel services, etc. If the predictability of the tourism season is weak. So also cultural and entertainment venues and all kinds of cultural events, rentals and insurance and retail and public safety, etc. And healthcare, just staffing. If you've got an event that varies by 9 weeks, that makes it really difficult to make any money in the tourism industry. And when the timing shifts, the entire system feels it. So it also matters to the lakes what happens. So if early ice out, if ice out if ice leaves earlier, then or we have a short winter on our lakes. Lakes tend to be warmer and they tend to have more layered, more stratification, and the higher risk of summer deoxygenation of the lower water. It also leads to more water weeds, some higher risks of aquatic invasive species, and a shift toward warm water advantages for warm water fish species. Also, it gives you a much earlier growing season and long-term water chemistry shifts. In fact, during the wintertime, the alkalinity or that white stuff that's dissolved in the water or water hardness tends to get frozen out. And if the ice is there for a shorter period and is less ice, then you don't freeze it out of the water and you get a buildup of various ions that are really not the kinds of ions we have a lot of in our lakes. If the ice out is late, then you get cooler, more mixed lakes, and they have better deep water oxygen retention because the season is longer. Shorter. Favors cool water fishes and native species, and the shorter season, well, it kind of helps reset water chemistry over time. So when ice timing changes, everything changes in lakes, from fish and water clarity to invasive species, risks, and even lake water chemistry. So here's a QR code that'll take you to the Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker. We call it MELT. And we've made some improvements this year. We've added 2025 data and we've updated forecasts. These are refreshed daily starting on January 1st. In fact, surprisingly, we can start forecasting ice out way back at the beginning of January. And it uses 5 important drivers. And I'll touch on these a couple of times through this talk. Obviously, freezing weather, because the more freezing weather you have, the more ice you have. Melting weather, clearly important because you got to have some warmth in order to melt the ice. Lake size is important because lakes, bigger lakes tend to thaw out slower. And also the lake location in the state. And we have a pretty tall state and it spans something like 3 degrees of latitude. So you get a very different sun angle. in the northern part of the state than the southern part, and also seasonal snowfall counts. And that's why I showed you that slide just a little bit ago. You can find the Thaw tracker just by putting into your browser Minnesota Lake Thaw Tracker, and you should get right to it. And it's pretty easy to use, but I'll walk through that in a second. Winter and spring conditions vary. Here's some pictures taken about the same time, right around now, maybe just a little bit later, in 3 different years. And one on the left, you can see lots and lots of snow, big snow year in 2023, almost no snow in 2024, a little snow in 2025. And here's a picture that I took a couple of days ago of exactly that same place. There's probably about 4 inches more of snow now than there was when I took the photo. But it's a moderate amount of snow. So these things change between years, and it has a big effect on how long those lakes hang onto their ice. So we can see, I can show you what thawing of a lake looks like. And I'm going to show you 48 seconds of video that transpired in over about 20 days. And this is March 20th through April 10th in a lake in Itasca County. And you can just kind of watch this, and I hope you're seeing the video okay. Here we are in sort of the latter part of March, and you can see the snow starting to clear out. And you see some cracks and a shore lead starting. A shore lead is that water around the edge of the ice. You can see a little motion. Oh, had a little extra snow. The sun is still working on it and moving and starting to break that ice. And now it's broken into pieces. Those pieces are moving back and forth with wind action and no waves yet, but certainly with wind action. When they move, they begin to erode each other. And then all of a sudden, boom, the ice is gone. And it's worth asking, how come that ice goes out so fast once it starts to break? And the answer is answer shown here. These are graphs of air temperature. You see in sort of blue and purple. One's actually the dew point, and the purple is the air temperature over the last month of days, basically at a station north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota, in Itasca County. The red line is the temperature of the water, and the temperature of the water is pretty stable. And this is at 3 feet. The temperature of the water just under the ice is 34.5 degrees, 2.5 degrees warmer probably than the bottom of the ice. And then when it stays that way, stays very stable. And so basically lakes thaw also from the top, from the top and from the bottom. So there's warm water underneath. And in fact, right now, the water in this lake at 30 feet is another 5 degrees warmer, and it's warming over time, over the winter. And Ted Ozerski talked a bit about this phenomenon in one of our the last water wisdom talks. I want to draw your attention to one thing that stuns me. You remember those really super cold days when we got down to minus 30 or so? That's the air temperature here. And here's a temperature is 34.5 degrees just under the ice surface. That's like 65 degrees Fahrenheit difference between the water underneath the ice and the air. That's amazing to me that there's that much insulating ability in those lakes. So, but now we're getting a lot of oscillations, and they're beginning to thaw from the bottom already. So what controls ice out timing? And I talked about the kinds of variables we use. Earlier ice out is driven by long, intense warm periods. This is high accumulated heat. And the wind also will break up the ice, and warm rain events will give you earlier ice out. Warmer stream inflow and runoff also tends to melt water around the edges. And smaller and shallower lakes tend to lose their ice faster, basically because there's more watershed impact. Thin snow cover also counts. There's more sunlight that reaches the ice and less insulating qualities of the snow. Later, ice out the other side of the coin is long cold winters, high accumulated freezing and freezing degree days. Deep snow cover tends to keep them insulated. Large, deep lakes tend to melt a lot slower, And being in the northern part of the state, even for the same amount of accumulated heat, means these lakes will thaw out more slowly. Persistent cold spring temperatures also keeps the lakes from thawing, and limited wind gives less mechanical breakup. So ice out really is a is a balance between a tug of war between stored winter cold and incoming spring energy, with some effects of size and geography. The amount and duration of freezing and thawing is really important. Here's an ice cube on the left at 10 minutes out in ambient air temperature, and you can see it after 1 hour. So that's why we use things like accumulated heat and accumulated cold. There are two simple ways to track winter and spring, and they are using accumulated freezing degree days and accumulated thawing degree days. Um, the freezing degree days tells us how much cold a lake experiences, and it combines how cold it is with how long it stays cold. Thawing degree days, on the other hand, tells us how much warming a lake receives, and it combines how warm it is and how long it stays warm. And there's an example on the slide, but we don't want to get too deeply in the weeds. But the bottom line is that ice out depends on the tug of war between winter cold, measured as freezing degree days, and spring warmth, which is thawing degree days. So let's look at what's under the hood of our site that is the thaw tracker. We take stored winter cold data from the National Weather Service, also spring heat and thawing degree days since January 1st. That's a measure of sun, warm air, and rain, and lake characteristics from the Department of Natural Resources. And we just basically use the lake size. And the model's question is basically, has spring heat outweighed winter cold yet? And how fast is that happening? And that's how we make these forecasts. 5 key factors I've hit on already: winter cold, spring warmth, snow cover, lake size, and latitude. And we used for these analyses, we used now about 15,000, not 14,000 historical ice out dates we got from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and you can find those online. We also used lake and size and location from Minnesota DNR and weather data from National Weather Service. The models include seasonal snow and north versus south in the state. Seasonal snow snow depth is hard to guess at or measure, insulates ice, reflects sunlight, etc. And snow depth adds about 2 days of ice per foot of accumulated snow. So you can think of this last snowfall, if you've got a foot of snow, it's probably going to push ice out date just a couple days later. Late snow matters less than early snow, so this is kind of medium snowfall here in February. Latitude, sun's angle matters. I talked about that a second ago. The south gets stronger spring sun because it's higher, and ice out shifts just about 3 to 5 days per degree north. And if you drive between Hinckley and Duluth, that's about 1 degree of latitude, just as an estimate. And normally it takes about something like about 260 thawing degree days to melt out a lake, and those we can measure using our thaw tracker. Those data are tracked from the North National Weather Service. And this is just a distribution of lake years of Minnesota data, 14,000 of them, showing the amount of accumulated heat it takes to melt our lakes. Forecasting, we did forecast at one extreme back in 2023, a very, very snowy and cold year. And so those ice out forecasts ended up being pretty far out into the future. And then 2024, there was almost no snow, you can see on the left, and pretty warm temperatures in this area. Last year, we had a colder winter than 2024, but still not very much snow. You can see the forecast temperatures, which actually came true for Minnesota on the right-hand side, and the amount of snow that there was. This year, we're looking a little somewhat moderate. We had a colder winter than 2025, and also low snow up until maybe overnight. But really, even a foot of snow probably wouldn't put us into the high snow category. The temperature outlook is about average. So is a precipitation outlook. So our thaw tracker should be, in fact, making pretty good forecasts from here on out. Now this may interest you because from first principles of limnology, we can actually calculate what the ice thickness was and is accumulating until it starts to thaw, of course. And this is from top to bottom here. You see Beltrami, Itasca, Aiken, Washington, Freeborn counties. And you can also see that the ice thickness varied quite a bit over the entire state. This is that really cold period here when we began accumulating a lot of ice really fast. So somehow, in the northern part of the state, we're probably just a little bit higher than maybe we're 25, 30 inches of ice out there now. But it will start to melt pretty fast from the bottom and from the top. Um, see, predicting the future is a kind of a hard thing to do, but our website updates those forecasts daily, and it uses all those variables like lake size and latitude, nearest airport weather. I wish we had really good weather on every lake. We don't. We have to estimate it from airport monitoring. It tracks winter cold and spring warmth. And when you get an estimate or a forecast out of the tracker, you'll see an estimate for low, average, and high snowfall rates. And that allows you, if you know what seasonal snowfall looks like is accumulating, you can make an even better forecast locally. So here's where you find the Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker. And you can follow this QR code or just Google Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker. Here's what it looks like. We call it the MELT or the Minnesota Lakes Thaw Tracker. You can watch the tracker for your favorite lake, provided your favorite lake is over about 100 acres. It's really hard for us to make any forecasts for little lakes, as I said, because they're very impacted by what goes on right around the edges of them. Here's what you'll see when you get there. There's some links to videos and stuff suggesting you try to keep yourself warm. But here's the way you operate this thing basically is when you get there, you go and enter your county, and then next thing you do is you enter your lake from a drop down. Most of the lakes over 100 acres are listed in the thaw tracker, so they're it's pretty simple to operate. And then you click this button that says get ice out forecast. And then the ice out forecast is shown to you down by the bottom for 3 different snow depths. And this is for one of my very favorite lakes from last year, actually, Itasca County, Wabana Lake. And you can see there's a range of ice out dates that are indicated over here in the column. And you can check it every day, and it will change a little bit day by day. And also look down at the fine print at the bottom. You can see what the thawing degree days are, and down here, there at this point when I made this estimate, there are only 9 accumulated thaw degree days, and we know it takes about 260 to melt out the lake, and that's so you can also look at those data and give yourself an even better sort of guesstimate of when you might be able to put in the docks and drop the boats in the lake. I've done that. Okay, now here's what the models are forecasting today for ice out right across the lake, or right across the state, sorry. And these are estimates for about a 2,000 acre lake. And you can add about 2 to 3 days for bigger lakes, subtract a few days for smaller lakes. And these are what the forecasts are looking like right now. But everything depends on weather going forward. Shallow lakes and those with big watersheds or large stream or river inputs will melt or thaw faster, and high winds can accelerate it somewhat. These are low snow forecasts that I made on the 17th of the month a couple of days ago. And you can see that down here at like Lake Albert Lee, we're looking at mid-month March, moving up to the Twin Cities area. This is White Bear Lake. It's looking at an ice out somewhere around the 26th of March. And of course, moving north, it gets a little bit later. And over here, you see something really interesting where there's a lot of lake influence. The ice out in the inland lakes tends to be a little bit faster up to the end of April for the northern part of the lake, and for lakes in Itasca County, we're probably looking at about the 20th of April. Now, here's a kind of a fun thing is we've been making these forecasts since January 1st this year, and on the top of this graph, you'll see the northern parts of the state, Aiken, Itasca, Beltrami County. And the forecast that we made back on January 1 is really not very different from the one that we're seeing now. A little bit of drift. It tended to get a little bit later during that really cold period, and a little bit earlier as we've accumulated a little warmth. Now, in the southern part of the state, for Washington, Twin Cities area, and like down and there points south, that warming was really substantial and is really driving those forecasts earlier. The more warming we get, I mean, 50-degree, 55-degree days in the Twin Cities tends to strip away the days basically before the lakes become open again. So that snowfall that we've just had that I showed you at the beginning, it should delay ice out just a little bit, not surprisingly, not a lot. Basically, the snow at this time of year for about a 3 feet of snow is only really adding about this shows about 6 days. If we get another 3 feet of snow, maybe it would add 6 days to the ice cover period. Early season thaw delays, like other variables, late season effects of all variables diminish as spring arrives and thaw becomes close to complete. Now, there are some things that you can do to help make better future forecasts. One is that you could sign up with the National Weather Service weather and snow depth reporting. I mentioned that seasonal snow depth is, I'd love to know how snow is accumulating across the state, but those data are really hard to find. If you could help the National Weather Service get those data, that'd be fantastic. And we'd be able to give you even better forecasts of lake ice out. You also, if you have a home weather station, there's a link here. You can connect your weather station to the National Weather Service system, and they're delighted to have more resolution in the data that they have across the state, and that would actually allow us to make better forecasts for you also. And also, it's surprisingly few of the state's lakes have ice up and ice out reported dates. And if you go to Minnesota State Climatology Office's Facebook page, you can figure out how you can report your own ice out and ice updates for your own favorite lake. So with that, here I am. I'm looking at the top of the lake. After looking at the bottom of the lake, I'd be happy to answer any questions about under or above the ice in winter. So I guess that's back to you, Brian.
All right, thank you, John. Before we take your questions, let me suggest that if you are enjoying today's presentation, please consider becoming a member of Itasca Waters. You can just use the QR code on your screen or go to itascawaters.org/donate and use the guest login. And now let's get to those questions. And handling this part of today's program is Jan Sandberg, Itasca Waters board member and chair of the Itasca Waters Education Committee. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, and welcome to the Q&A section for today's program. Please submit your questions in writing by clicking on the Q&A icon. We will not be using the chat function. I'm going to read the questions out loud, and they'll be answered by Dr. Downing. We may combine some of your questions and we may not get to all of them, but please feel free to email us at info@itascawaters.org after the meeting if you still have unanswered questions. So let the Q&A begin. First question. Ooh, it seems like more people and vehicles have gone through the ice this year. Is that mostly due to people misjudging conditions? Or is there something about how the ice was formed that made it less safe?
Thanks very much for that question. If you look at the Minnesota Sea Grant website, you see how much I worry about people and hypothermia and health impacts from too much exposure to very cold temperatures. So that I watch those reports pretty carefully. I don't think it has so much to do with how the ice was formed, but the ice across I think we tend to assume that if we could drive our truck on a lake last year or the year before, we can drive it in the same place this year. Ice is extremely variable, and the DNR makes a really good point that really you can't assume that ice is ever safe. And ever safe to go on. You just got to be really super careful. And actually, if you think about it, if you're putting your truck on a lake, you're actually asking the ice to bend enough to act like a boat and float it on the water. So it's not exactly being held up by ice. So it's pretty tricky stuff. Also, in a single lake, the ice depth at any given time will vary by basically plus or minus 50%. So if you find 15 inches someplace, it might be 7 inches another place. So and there are also things like springs or high groundwater inflow that tend to weaken the ice a lot. There's a place in my favorite lake for just inexplicably that it's always thin ice there and always wet on the surface. And I have no idea why that is. So ice is very variable. We had really a heavy duty period of ice formation with all that cold weather, but it followed a period of time when we didn't have much cold weather. So I think as soon as it gets cold, we think we can go where we've always gone on the ice. I really worry about people out there. So do be careful, be prepared. And on the Minnesota Sea Grant site, we have some suggestions for hypothermia kits and how to rescue people who go through the ice. And yeah, so I don't know the exact reason people are going through. Sometimes it's bad judgment, sometimes it's bad luck, and well, there are often beverages involved, so be careful. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, next question. What causes ice ridges to form?
Yeah.
And how do they generate enough force to damage docks and push up shorelines?
Oh, there are two forces that form ice ridges, and you got, part of it has to do with just the expansion of ice. If you have a mile stretch of ice and you have a 20-degree change in temperature of the surface of that ice, that is going to push, it's going to push about 4 feet. And then 4 feet, it's going to expand it by 4 feet. 4 feet has to go somewhere and shrinks by 4 feet, and then you get more ice around the edge. And so there's a lot of pressure simply from contraction and expansion of the ice sheets. And when they run into each other, if you have bays, you'll find these ice ridges across areas of where open water meets a bay. And often those ice ridges are just a release of energy by the expansion contraction of ice sheets. Now, the wind blowing across ice will also have an effect, and I saw that in Mille Lacs Lake a couple of years ago. Just amazing buildup of ice on the eastern shore, and that is often wind driven once it starts to break up. And wind will start moving ice. You can't really see it if it's a kind of a solid sheet, but it's exerting a force that will give about 3% of the wind velocity to the ice. It's at least trying. And so if you push that ice, it will build up an ice ridge and also ice push up on your shore. Think about if you've got a piece of ice that's about 20 inches thick and 10 feet by 10 feet, and it's moving at 3 miles an hour, it has more force than a skid steer. So it's pushing up and bulldozing basically up your shore, and that will take out docks and everything. We take our docks all the way out of the water as far as possible because of that. So yeah, the ice ridges get formed by expansion and contraction of ice pushing up against sheets, pushing up against each other, and also by wind forces that will push those sheets again up against each other.
Okay, now here's one that seems a bit complicated. So, long question. When it comes to ice breakup, which is more influential, sustained air temperatures or solar radiation, and does their importance shift as the melt season progresses?
Yeah, yes. I mean, yes, it shifts. Yes, it does shift. Um, and I don't know about it. Okay, so I've got a, yeah, it's the most influential aspect is how thick that ice has gotten due to freezing and how much how much thawing weather there's been. So those are the things that really push it hardest. Snow cover will keep that thawing weather from having much of an impact. Um, so and of course, solar radiation drives temperature, right? So solar radiation would be related to the increased thawing weather. But also, many of you have probably watched ice begin to melt when you've got a lot of sunshine and you get candle ice and the ice changes its characteristics and so on. It'll actually expand. I love the sound of expanding, contracting ice. It's singing and booming and stuff, but it's mostly temperature, I think, that really drives it. Another thing you get, of course, as soon as you get any thawing around the edges, then you got warm water coming in. And as I said before, the water is already warm underneath. So it's melting from the bottom, melting from the top. So one thing I'd really like to figure out sometime is, what's the effect of stored heat in lakes? They store really a lot. And so if it freezes fast in the fall, my guess is they've got a lot more heat in it and maybe it melts it faster. So, but it's basically temperature changes.
Okay. So, how do ice candles form?
Yeah, it's dripping. You get pools of water and you'll get water actually falling through little cracks in the ice. And it will actually, since it's warmer than the ice itself, then it will make its own break in the ice. And I'm not exactly sure why it makes those beautiful sort of candle-like forms. I love the sound of them jingling when the wind is making a few waves at the shore. But it's all part of that freeze thaw kind of deal where you've got standing water. Water is is warming due to the sun, and it's melting through and making little fissures between pieces of more solid ice.
Okay. Well, here's a question from Kurt C. Does or can sinking ice contribute significantly to ice out?
Sinking ice. Well, the thing is, ice probably won't sink. There is ice that forms on the bottom of rivers and things, and it can stay down there, but it actually would like to float because of the characteristics of water. It's a special deal. So I don't really think you get chunks of ice that actually go down toward the bottom. You'll get them bobbing about, in the waves and so on, but they'll stay at the surface because, um, let's see if so. Water at about 38 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit is the densest it gets, right? that's sort of the heaviest. The density is like, a pound of lead or a pound of feathers, right? It's the pound of lead is higher density, and it gets highest density at about 40 degrees. And below 40 degrees, which is what ice will be, it's always, it's always going to be sort of lighter and float on top of that colder water. So I don't think that it really sinks, but it does bob around, but it melts really fast, and it's because of the stored heat within the lake. Oh, and you'll notice that, you know, if you're having a Coca-Cola with ice cubes in it, well, Coca-Cola is a little denser than water. Put, ice cubes in a glass of water, they're always going to float. They don't really sink. So, and that's just because water is a miracle. It's amazing.
Well, speaking of speed, to what extent is a rapid ice breakup driven more by wind bursts
Yeah.
than by temperature? And is it possible for thaw forecast to predict high risk ice out events days in advance?
Two really interesting questions. Wind will accelerate ice out if you've already got breaks in the ice, because the wave action will start to really erode physically and break up that ice. And so that's the point, that wind will have a really big effect. And forecasting high risk events, or a risk of rapid ice out is really hard. In fact, you'll see in the Minnesota Thaw Tracker, as you're watching your lake, pretty soon we get to a point where ice could go out any day, based on accumulated heat. And then we say ice out is imminent or already passed, because it gets really hard to predict when it's really close. We are, I think our forecasts are working. We'll see at the end of this season how well these forecasts have worked. But in the past, they worked super well. I mean, I remember, last year I made a forecast of one of my favorite lakes, and it was supposed to be on a particular date, and it was like one day different from that. I made that forecast back in early January, and that's because ice thickness matters, right? If we built up a lot of ice, it does matter. It takes longer to melt.
So you won the pool that year? Okay.
Yeah, I don't join because I cheat, but I do get a congratulatory notes or thank you notes from people who did win their ice out pool. And in fact, one of the executive vice chancellors of UMD famously won their ice out pool on one of the first years we had a tracker. So yeah, yeah, I don't ever join because I think that's cheating.
Okay, we'll hold you to that.
Okay.
What about these midwinter thaws that we've been hearing
Yeah.
about? Do they meaningfully weaken the ice pack?
They make it really different, because if you've tried to walk on a lake after, maybe even if it's gotten quite cold after the thaw, you'll find your foot breaking through, going through some slush and hitting
Mm.
solid ice down below. And so it makes a really kind of a different, weaker sort of ice, unless it all refreezes. If you have intense cold again, then it'll make more solid ice. So it's a kind of a different layer. Now, one really weird thing that we found in doing these analyses is that if you have a big snowfall event, sorry, yeah, if you have a big snowfall event wait, no, I've got it wrong. Oh, if you have a lot of thawing weather, in early January, it actually tends to prolong ice cover, which didn't make any sense to me until we realized that if you're getting January weather that is very warm, often you're getting a lot of snowfall, right? I mean, we kind of
Oh,
saw that over the last days. So if you have an early winter thaw, sometimes that'll make ice out later, and that's all built into the thaw tracker. So it's yeah, kind of easy to see, but it's just strange that those early thaws tend to prolong ice cover.
So here's one that's very practical. What key indicators signal that an ice-covered lake is nearing breakup?
Well, the Minnesota Lake Thaw Tracker, I mean, it's gonna give it to you, right? You can just go in there, click around, and you'll find it. You also can look in there, and even if it says, um, ice out is close or imminent, you can look at that number, which is the thaw degree day piece. And if it's in like the 200 range, that that ice is almost history, right? And you can just look at that, even though it won't give you a date, it will tell you how much accumulated heat there is. Um, if you're looking at a lake, you're going to start getting puddles and break up around the edge. You'll get puddles on the ice and break up around the edge. And you may have noticed if you spend a lot of time around lakes that you get open water at the edge quite, quite early. And that actually allows that ice sheet to move around and start breaking things. And also, my friend Dave Lick in Itasca County tells me he takes a sauna every day, and he said as soon as you get melt around the edges, the water underneath the ice gets warm, and we'll be seeing that on our sort of tracking. So once you get that open, the shore lead we call it, and you start getting ice flows that are moving, you can be pretty sure the ice is almost toast. It's almost gone.
So, do large lakes stay frozen significantly longer than small ones? And is ice out driven more by depth or surface area?
We only have surface area for Minnesota lakes, so that's the only driver we can really use because we don't have really good depth data. So, but large lakes tend to be deeper, and so they're both
Oops.
kind of driving now. Deep lakes are going to store more heat than shallow lakes. There's a lot of heat down in the bottom of lakes in the winter time. So the deeper it is, the more heat will really be there. What was the first part of that, Jan? There was a first part of the question.
Oh, the first part of the question was, do large lakes
Yeah.
stay frozen significantly longer than
Okay.
than small ones? And then its depth or surface area.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they do. And for every tenfold increase in in size, um, you can add a couple of days, 2 to 4 days. We're still seeing you, Jan. You're walking around. I think you're okay.
Okay.
Are you going to look at your lake probably and see if it's got a shore lead?
We will get up there and do that.
Okay.
Just a second. I'm having a little unstable internet thing, but I think we can figure it out. Okay. Do lakes with lower water clarity tend to experience earlier ice out because darker, more turbid water absorbs more solar energy?
Oh, what a terrific question. Oh, wow. Somebody knows something about lakes. That's nice. I think you're not getting a lot of absorbance by the water because the water's not really exposed. It's the ice that's exposed. And it might even be the other way around. There's a lake scientist who lives on Deer Lake in Itasca County who's done, Jack Jones, some of you may know him, has done a lot of analyses of this. And he suggests that it's that the cooler, sorry, cooler, I get mixed up. It's a lot of analysis, but the late ice out tends to give you cooler water, and um, you may in fact see differences in clarity. So you may see less if you have a lot of rainfall in June and cooler weather in May, which would be, kind of late ice out, then that will influence water clarity. So I think ice out has an impact on water clarity more than water clarity having an impact on ice out.
Whoa. Okay. What, this is actually a technical question. That's a good one. What are the main challenges in developing the models that accurately predict ice thickness and other ice characteristics?
Well, the approach we used was pretty straightforward, and glad to talk about it at any time. But because things change over the season, we do an analysis that's specific to every day. So we have analysis of um, what we take. It's a huge data set. I would say that's a big challenge. We have 15,000 observations of ice out, and so that in itself is a kind of a challenge. But then we step through the season day by day, start looking at, what were the conditions on January 1st when the ice out went out on this particular day for 14,000 lakes, and then you do a statistical analysis that builds a new model for every day of the year. Um, that I think is a challenge. I was helped out a lot by John Emmer and Abby Hoffman working in the Sea Grant office and pulling those data um, off of the Minnesota DNR page. So lots and lots of data to crunch and lots of observations to put together. Um, I've been talking to some friends of mine who use artificial intelligence approaches, machine learning, and we could probably get better forecasts if we'd use some of those machine learning approaches. What we use is just standard statistical analyses like actuaries use for life insurance and stuff like that. So, but yeah, we're thinking of trying some new things.
Okay, I
But
think
what
we're
I'd
going to
really like to do, Jan, is forecast ice thickness and ice in, and we're going to work on that.
ice in. Ooh, okay. Maybe next year we'll have a program on that.
Okay.
Okay, I think we might have maybe one or two questions. Let's see how quickly you answer. Okay, how much does total freezing degree days determine final ice thickness?
Totally.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
because
that was quick.
yeah, totally. That's very fast. Okay, so here's what we're working on. You see, you're sort of reading my mind here because what I want to do is be able to forecast, or not forecast, but calculate ice thickness, and we want to build a model to do that. But it takes a certain amount of freezing a freezing temp to actually create ice cover, and it takes less for a little water body than a big water body because of wave action and all that kind of stuff. And then you start counting on the freezing degree days on the day of ice up, and that will give you a very good forecast or calculation of ice thickness. Now, again, all the caveats are there. Ice thickness is variable, and be careful. And there is no safe ice. Um, but that's how we calculated those ice thicknesses. Basically, first principles of physics.
And this is our last question. Is earlier ice out a significant contributor to increased aquatic plant growth throughout the season?
I
What
would
do you
say,
think?
yeah, I would say yes, and um, it's for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a longer growing season and there's more sunlight and the water's warmer, and stuff like that. But the other one is if you have really thick ice, it actually will scour away the plants in the shallow water and freeze them out in some cases. So if you have 3 feet of ice, you probably are not going to keep much in the way of plant growth in 3 feet or less of water just because of ice scour and ice impact. So it does have an effect in a couple of different ways. And the other thing we're concerned about is it'll make it if we have increasingly early ice out, then we will have warmer waters, and our lakes may become hospitable to species that are really not the ones we normally see. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I think your timing is impeccable, and I think we're going to send it back to Brian.
Thanks, Jan.
Okay, thank you, Jan, and thank you to the always interesting John Downing. This program will be available soon on our website, itascawaters.org. Please feel free to recommend it to your family, to friends, and to neighbors. Also, we're asking for your ideas about the Water Wisdom series. You can respond to the evaluation form we'll email you. The next regular practical Water Wisdom program will be on March the 5th. and it's titled Strategies for Recreational Watercraft Regulation. You can register for free on itascawaters.org. I'm Brian Whittemore, and thank you for watching today.